I always knew something was off when the morning silence felt too perfect. The birds chirped, the breeze hummed, but something crucial was missing: the rhythmic rustle of Clover's steps near the feeding station. It was like a ghost town in the part of my farm where she usually roamed. My gut twisted. I whistled once, twice, but no familiar rustling came from the woods. Clover always came. She was practically trained at this point, a wild creature that had somehow become family. I pulled out my phone and checked the GPS tracker I had fitted around her neck last fall, courtesy of a state-funded wildlife research program. The signal showed she was still on my land, but stationary, unmoving. My pulse picked up. Deer didn't just stay still for that long, unless something was wrong. Boots crunching against the damp morning grass, I followed the tracker's coordinates, my mind already cycling through worst-case scenarios. Had she been injured? Caught in a poacher's snare? God forbid. Had one of those idiot HOA residents ignored the property lines and taken a shot at her? I muttered a curse under my breath. The closer I got, the more dread clawed at my chest. The tracker's last ping was near the creek at the edge of my land, right where it met the backyards of Oakridge Estates, the hellish suburban development that had sprouted up in the past decade, ruled by the tyrannical HOA queen herself, Deborah Whitmore, or as everyone called her, Karen. I stopped short. The ground was disturbed. A freshly dug mound of dirt sat near the tree line, just a few feet from the creek. My stomach sank as I dropped to my knees and clawed at the soil. First, I found the GPS collar, the strap cut clean through. Then, I found the blood-soaked leaf. Clover was gone. Someone had shot her and buried the evidence. A red haze filled my vision. My hands curled into fists as I stared at the cut collar. This wasn't some freak accident. This was deliberate. This was personal. I stormed back to the house, rage simmering just under my skin, and yanked open my laptop. There was only one place to check first. The Oakridge Estates HOA Facebook group. A cesspool of neighborhood snitches, overenthusiastic rule enforcers, and people who thought having a no-fun policy was a personality trait. And there it was. A post from Karen herself, time-stamped last night. A grainy photo of her grinning like a damn psychopath, posing next to Clover's antlers, a hunting rifle in one manicured hand. Trophy hunting in my own backyard. Sorry Bambi. Survival of the fittest. Nail polish. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood so fast I nearly knocked it over. She was bragging. She had no clue what she had just done. No clue that this wasn't just any deer. No clue that she had just illegally killed a research animal. I cracked my knuckles. Time for war. I grabbed my keys and made the drive to Oakridge Estates, rolling into the pristine, soulless neighborhood that reeked of freshly cut grass, overpriced SUVs, and a general lack of joy. The HOA clubhouse was hosting one of their routine morning meetings, where residents gathered to hear Karen dictate her latest unnecessary rules. No flags of any kind. No mailboxes that weren't pre-approved. No dogs over 20 pounds. And now, apparently, no protected wildlife. I pushed open the doors, and all conversation stopped. The room was filled with retirees in pastel-colored sweaters and middle-aged homeowners who lived for passive-aggressive complaints about lawn height. And at the center of it all, in her self-appointed throne, sat Karen. Blonde bob perfectly in place, nails gleaming, expression smug. I didn't waste time. I walked straight to the front, pulled out Clover's GPS collar, and tossed it onto the table in front of her. Explain this. Karen blinked, then looked at the collar like it was a used tissue someone had thrown at her. She wrinkled her nose. I have no idea what that is. I leaned in, my voice sharp as a blade. That's the tracking collar from the deer you shot. The one you buried in my woods. The one that was part of a state wildlife conservation program. Murmurs rippled through the room. Even the die-hard HOA loyalists shifted uncomfortably. Karen, however, merely sighed, adjusting her sweater. Oh please. It was a deer. They're practically pests. She scoffed. If anything, I did you a favor. I nearly saw red. A favor? A favor? You poached a protected animal, I snapped. That deer had a GPS tracker on it. Do you even understand what that means? The state is going to see exactly where she was last before she died. And guess whose backyard that is? Karen's smirk faltered for the briefest second. The state isn't going to do anything, she said, crossing her arms. It was on my property. And I don't see a problem with hunting a nuisance. A slow grin spread across my face. Well, let's test that theory, shall we? I pulled out my phone and, with a single tap, sent the GPS data directly to the local game warden. I just sent everything over. I'd love to see you explain yourself when they come knocking. Karen's face paled just slightly before she forced a laugh. You're being ridiculous. It's not like I shot someone's pet dog. My jaw clenched. She was more than just a deer. Silence settled over the room, thick and suffocating. Even the people who usually worshipped Karen as the HOA's queen bee looked uneasy. Finally, she waved a dismissive hand. Whatever. This meeting is over. She grabbed her purse and stood, trying to make an escape. I stepped in front of her. Oh no, Karen. This is just getting started. The moment Karen stormed out of that HOA meeting, I knew this wasn't over. She thought she could shrug off what she did, but she had no clue what was coming. A person could weasel their way out of HOA fines and petty neighborhood disputes, but poaching a protected animal? That was a whole different league. And I had the proof to make sure she felt every ounce of karma coming her way. I wasted no time. As soon as I got back to my truck, I called the local game warden's office. The woman on the other end of the line didn't even let me finish my sentence before her voice sharpened with interest. A GPS-collared research deer shot and buried? That was serious. Within minutes, they dispatched an officer to meet me at my farm. By the time Officer Reynolds arrived, I had everything laid out. The GPS tracking data, screenshots of Karen's ridiculous Facebook post, even pictures of the fresh burial site where I found Clover's collar. He examined everything carefully, nodding as he swiped through the evidence on my phone. This is bad, Reynolds muttered. Real bad. Yeah, tell me something I don't know, I said, crossing my arms. She didn't just hunt outside of season. This is a research animal. That's felony territory. I could have kissed the man. Instead, I grinned and leaned against my truck. So what's next? Please tell me it involves Karen regretting every life decision she's ever made. Reynolds sighed and shook his head. Well, first we'll have to conduct an official investigation. I'll need to get a warrant to search her property for the remains. I didn't love the sound of that. A warrant meant waiting. Waiting meant time for Karen to do what she did best, squirm her way out of trouble. Any way to fast-track this? I asked. Reynolds gave me a pointed look. Unless she confesses or does something stupid to tip us off, we have to follow the legal steps. Karen doing something stupid wasn't out of the question. In fact, it was almost guaranteed. I didn't have to wait long for her to start digging her own grave. Less than an hour after I left the HOA meeting, she was already in damage control mode, spinning a web of excuses on the Oak Ridge Estates Facebook page. According to her new version of events, she had no idea the deer was special. She claimed it was aggressive, that it had been charging at neighborhood pets and children, forcing her to take action for the safety of the community. I snorted so hard reading that post I nearly choked on my coffee. Clover, aggressive? That deer was about as intimidating as a golden retriever with a head cold. If anyone in the neighborhood had ever seen her, they knew Karen was lying through her veneers. But Karen had power, and power made people stupidly loyal. A handful of HOA members jumped to her defense, nodding along like sheep. But something interesting started happening. More people started pushing back. Neighbors I never expected to speak up suddenly chimed in. People were digging into Karen's past, pointing out all the times she had lied, manipulated, or outright bullied people into getting her way. She fined me $200 for painting my door blue. Said it wasn't community approved. She reported my son's lemonade stand for violating food safety regulations. He's 7. She cut down my magnolia tree because she didn't like how it blocked her view. One comment, in particular, caught my attention. A woman named Lisa claimed Karen had threatened her with a fine for feeding stray cats in the neighborhood. She told me if I wanted to live with animals, I should buy a farm like that hick outside the HOA, Lisa wrote. Well. Looked like Karen had more enemies than she thought. I leaned back in my chair, smirking. Karen was losing her grip, and all I had to do was give one good push. The next morning, I was woken up by the sound of a truck pulling into my driveway. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside, expecting Reynolds again. Instead, it was a news van. A short woman with a determined look and a microphone stepped out, eyes bright with the hunger of someone who smelled scandal. "Jack Landry?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Who's asking?" "Jenna Carter, Channel 5 News. We got a tip about a protected research deer being illegally hunted by a member of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. Would you care to comment?" I let out a slow whistle. Someone had sent the media after Karen, and I had a very strong suspicion about who. I led Jenna and her crew to the spot where I had found Clover's remains. I walked them through everything: her tracking data, the conservation program, and of course, Karen's now infamous Facebook post. By the time we finished, Jenna looked like Christmas had come early. "This is huge," she said, shaking her head. "A protected animal, an HOA president abusing power, and social media evidence? This story writes itself." "Make sure you spell my name right," I said with a smirk. "Because this is just getting started." Sure enough, by noon, the story had gone live. Karen's smug face was plastered on the news, right next to an image of Clover in the wild, looking peaceful and innocent. The contrast was damning. Karen, of course, reacted exactly how I expected. She doubled down. She went live on Facebook, ranting about rural lunatics and overblown media hysteria. She called me a liar, claimed I was harassing her, and insisted she was the real victim. It was the worst possible move she could have made. The wildlife conservation community caught wind of her nonsense and unleashed hell. People flooded her social media with outrage. Conservationists, animal lovers, and legal experts all chimed in, pointing out every law she had broken. Then the best part happened. The state's Department of Wildlife Enforcement issued an official statement confirming they had launched an investigation. Karen was spiraling, and she knew it. That night, just as I was enjoying a well-earned beer on my porch, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of an email. The email was from the Oak Ridge Estates HOA board, informing residents that an emergency vote was being called to remove Karen as president. Below the screenshot, a single message was typed. "Thought you might want to see this. Consider it a thank you." I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't have to. Karen had ruled Oak Ridge Estates with an iron fist for years. But now, even her most loyal followers were jumping ship. She was done. I took another sip of my beer, letting the moment sink in. And tomorrow I was going to make sure it only got worse for her. Karen must have known she was losing. The signs were all there. Her once loyal HOA followers were whispering behind her back. The media was tearing her reputation apart. Wildlife conservationists were calling for her prosecution. But instead of cutting her losses and keeping her head down, she did what Karen always did. She made everything worse. The morning after the emergency HOA vote was announced, I woke up to find a city inspector parked outside my barn. The guy barely made eye contact as he handed me a notice stating that my property was being investigated for multiple zoning violations. Apparently, Karen had reported me for illegal farming activities and unauthorized animal enclosures. The irony was laughable. My farm had been here long before Oak Ridge Estates even existed. If anyone was violating zoning laws, it was the HOA that had built their cookie-cutter houses too close to agricultural land. I sighed and leaned against the fence, watching the inspector awkwardly shuffle through paperwork. Look, I know who sent you, I said. And I know this is all nonsense. You want to waste your time, be my guest. Just make sure to spell my name right on the report. The guy muttered something about just doing his job before driving off. I shook my head, already pulling out my phone. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I had no problem getting my hands in the mud. I spent the next few hours making calls. First, to my lawyer, just in case Karen decided to escalate her harassment. Then, to the local wildlife enforcement office, checking in on their progress. The case was moving forward faster than expected. Karen was officially under investigation for unlawful hunting of a protected species. She had been asked to turn over any remains of the deer, but, predictably, she refused to cooperate. That only made things worse for her. By lunchtime, another bombshell hit. The HOA board announced that Karen was being suspended as president pending further review. It wasn't a full removal yet, but it was clear they were trying to distance themselves from the scandal. Without her position, Karen had no real power left. The walls were closing in. That afternoon, I decided to pay her a visit. Not at her house. I had no interest in setting foot on her perfectly manicured lawn. Instead, I waited until she left to run one of her errands and intercepted her in the grocery store parking lot. She saw me before I could even say a word. Her face twisted into something between rage and desperation, and she practically hissed at me as she shoved a shopping cart between us. "You need to stop harassing me," she snapped. "This is bordering on obsession." I crossed my arms and raised an eyebrow. "You buried a protected deer in my woods and then reported my farm for fake violations. You really want to talk about obsession?" Karen scoffed, tossing a carton of overpriced organic milk into her cart. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone and held it up. "Oh, I think you do. See, the game warden's office just confirmed that you're refusing to cooperate. And from what I hear, they're not taking that lightly. Something about felony charges." She flinched. It was brief, but I saw it. A crack in her armor. "You have no proof," she said through gritted teeth. I grinned. "Oh, but I do. GPS data. Screenshot. Witness statements. And let's not forget your little social media post bragging about your trophy hunt." I leaned in slightly. "You can either hand over what's left of the deer and take whatever slap on the wrist they're willing to give you, or you can keep digging yourself into a hole you'll never get out of." Her hands clenched around the cart handle. For a second, I thought she might start screaming. Instead, she let out a shaky breath and turned away. "Get out of my face," she muttered. I took that as a victory and walked off, leaving her to stew in her own mess. The next day, things got even worse for her. News broke that the Department of Wildlife Enforcement had officially obtained a warrant to search her property. The HOA board, realizing they had been backing a sinking ship, issued a statement formally removing her as president. Suddenly, all those people who had feared her wrath were coming forward with their own horror stories. It turned out Karen had been skimming HOA funds for years, using fines and fees to pad her own lifestyle. Once the authorities started digging, they found even more dirt. Tax fraud, misuse of HOA funds, even a shady deal where she sold off community property for personal profit. Karen wasn't just losing her reputation. She was about to lose everything. The day the wildlife officers arrived to search her backyard, I made sure I was there to watch. She stood on her front porch, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might snap. A few of her former allies were watching from a distance, whispering among themselves, pretending like they hadn't spent years defending her. When the officers started digging, it didn't take long to find what they were looking for: the remains of the deer. Karen lost it. She started screaming at the officers, at me, at anyone within earshot. She called it harassment, a setup, a conspiracy. She threatened to sue. But none of it mattered. The evidence was undeniable. She was arrested on the spot. Watching her get shoved into the back of a police car was the most satisfying thing I had seen in years. But the best part? She knew it wasn't over. She knew this was only the beginning of her downfall. Over the next few weeks, the HOA completely unraveled. With Karen gone, the community turned against itself, fighting over leadership, finances, and years of shady dealings. In the end, the entire association collapsed. The HOA disbanded, the ridiculous rules were thrown out, and the neighborhood finally got a taste of freedom. As for me, I didn't just sit back and enjoy the show. I went a step further. Karen's house, the one she had used as her personal kingdom, went up for sale not long after her arrest. Most people wouldn't touch it, given the scandal surrounding her name. But I didn't mind. I bought it, dirt cheap, and then I turned it into a wildlife education center. The irony was perfect. The very place where Karen had ruled with an iron fist, the house where she plotted against neighbors and destroyed everything she didn't like, was now a sanctuary for the very animals she had despised. The grand opening was a hit. Families brought their kids to learn about conservation efforts. Volunteers from the state's wildlife program came to give talks about local ecology. And right in the front yard, where Karen once scolded children for stepping on her precious grass, stood a statue of a deer. A tribute to Clover. One evening, as the sun set over the property, I sat on the porch and watched a group of kids marvel at a new fawn that had been spotted near the wood. A newspaper fluttered in the wind beside me, the headline catching my eye. Former HOA president sentenced. Poaching scandal ends in legal disaster. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the moment sink in. Karma was a beautiful thing.